Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming along to the session today. I'm super excited to be running this session on using generative AI to create unlimited content within game worlds. I'm here today with Russ Harding, Chief Gaming Officer of Saltwater Games, and we've got some really interesting content, I think, in the slide deck today, talking through what you can do, things you can use generative AI for within various different use cases within games that we're going to step through in the slide deck today. So we are recording the session today. I'd appreciate it if people could turn off any noisy devices and things just so they don't end up on the recording. But otherwise, we're about to get going. So with that said, I'm going to hand over to Russ.
Thanks, Carl. So as Carl said, I'm the Chief Gaming Officer for Saltwater Games, which without a doubt is probably one of the coolest titles in C-Suite. But what that actually means is I work with all our creatives and game directors, working on our new concepts, looking at technologies, looking at player behaviour, and generally working across quality over our titles. So at Saltwater, we're made up of 3 studios, just to give you some background. Main series is predominantly known for its VR titles, so it's worked with renowned IP such as Doctor Who, the Peaky Blinders, bringing those to life in VR. And excitingly, we're bringing a new IP of our own, which is a mixed reality title, which brings to life a puzzle in your living room using Apple Vision Pro, and will work across all of the other headsets as well. And then Nexus Labs, which really focuses around community gaming and empowering players to take part in those communities and be part of building the games as we progress through development. And Quantum Interactive is our labs, so that's an area that looks at new technologies in gaming, so we'll look at things like blockchain or Web3, or as this talks about, AI. So I know that we won't be the only AI talk. I'm sure there have been many. You might have been in a few, but hopefully we can cover some things that maybe think differently about using AI. So there's a lot of talk about utilising NPCs and personalisation of those NPCs so they have more natural behaviours, that they can interact with players in different ways. There's also talk about creating dynamic storytelling, maybe dramatic story arcs, or utilising story to give goals and quests, and doing that using generative AI. And people have been talking about collaborating with AI to sort of use it as a tool to sort of like accelerate ideas and concepts, or even create content in itself, like procedural generated worlds and textures and concept art. But I guess where we really became interested was when we were thinking about like what AI can bring and the problems it could solve that we have as developers, was more about accessibility and inclusivity within games. So we all personally play games as individuals. We all have our own gaming styles. But how powerful it would be if we could start to adapt to you and give you greater access to games, possibly balancing the games so that you gain more enjoyment out of it or they're more accessible. So I'm going to take you through an example, which is Resurgence, which is our game that's based around building a community in a crafting open-world survival game. It's set in 1,000 years in the future after ecological disaster, where players and communities rebuild and resurgence around sort of familiar Earth. It's really a sandbox for our players to create mini-games and challenges and to explore in a survival way that world. But with that, it brings several challenges because it's an open-world game. So some of the things we started to really think about was how can you explore AI and its capabilities to really enhance the experience for players. And like I said, each one of you are individuals. You all play games in a very different way. But if I could cater to your preferences and predict sort of like some of the behaviours that you as individuals have or desire, then that's something that we can't really do at the moment, and generative AI could help us do that, so to personalise that experience for you. So we started to think about how we could integrate generative AI using some of the game development techniques that we already have around AI, and start to create a personalized experience, something that was tailored to you as a user. So I'm going to take you through our roadmap. So this is a roadmap that we've followed over the last 6 to 8 months, and it's really our journey through generative AI and where we started from. One of the areas that we were really keen to explore was around how generative AI might help build story or help introduce players to story and do that in a dynamic way. So as I said, as a game in our communities, we're building in front of our players. So we're building our audience and community as we're building the game. And one of the ways we really wanted to engage that community whilst we were building prototypes and showcasing them to them was also building a narrative world that they could be in, feel like they're part of and participate in. So we created a deep narrative lore with a writer called Tim LeBon, who writes a lot about ecological horror and fiction. So we created a story that kind of explores the world before Resurgence, the game starts, based around the kind of ecological disaster. So sort of exploring the themes around sort of like the politics and the factions in the world at that time. And we wanted players to kind of engage with that, kind of get a little bit of a pre-story whilst we build. So interestingly enough, the videos that we share sometimes on our social streams are made with Midjourney and Runway AI. I suppose we were trying to think of other ways to interact with the story, make it more immersive. So on our website, we have Thor AI. Thor is a character in our game. Ironically, it's an AI character that carries on into the future. And we'll see how AI evolves in 1,000 years' time. He's a real character and guide. So developing the website, we wanted to encourage players to explore the story. So a more individualized reading experience. So rather than us just dictating the story to the players, we have this host of lore, and we really wanted people to be able to explore it at their own pace. So by entering text prompts and asking Thor various questions around the world of 2033, you can follow a line of inquiry. So who was responsible for the ecological disaster? What factions were involved? Who were the Earth Dogs, who are a group of activists? Who led them? So depending on your inquiry, you can kind of engage with the story, delve a bit deeper. So actually, I'm going to hand over to Carl, who's going to go through probably a bit more how we implemented that.
Cool. Thanks, Russ. So yeah, we're not going to go super technical in this session today, but I want to talk a bit about what we used in the background and how we have enabled the Thor AI that Russ has just been talking about. So there's a high-level architecture on the screen at the moment. The core components of what we're using for Thor AI are essentially, fundamentally, a large language model. In this particular case, we're using an AWS service called Bedrock, but it's kind of incidental to this specific use case. And the process we went through to get Thor AI up and running. We've got an interactive demo you can play with that we'll share at the end of this session. But essentially, the guys at Saltwater have a huge library full of lore that describes the backstory of the world of Resurgence. And the first step in the process of building the Thor AI generative model was to take all of that lore, to vectorize it, which is essentially a way of storing that textual data into what we call a vector store or a vector database in a way that similar information and semantic meaning of words is stored in a certain way in the database. So if I ask a question about something, we can very easily go to the right part of the database and say, hey, if I'm asking a question about this, it's probably related to this set of data that sits over here. So all of that Resurgence lore gets vectorized, loaded into a vector database. The players are then going to interact by typing their queries directly into the web app of Thor AI. So you can ask it your questions around, hey, like Russ said, what caused the ecological collapse in the world of Resurgence? That query in itself then gets vectorized as well. What we can then do is we can take that query, do a lookup in the vector database and say, hey, what law is relevant to what this player is asking? All of that, so both the query and the law that's retrieved from the database is passed on to the large language model, and that large language model can then use both the query and the law that it's been augmented with to return a very conversational and very fleshed out and detailed response in response to the user's questions. And fundamentally, that's it. The key concepts that we've just gone through are on the screen now, but fundamentally it's a case of taking a whole big store library full of data, vectorizing it, loading it into a database, and being able to do the same thing with the query. That, for those that aren't familiar, is generally referred to as retrieval augmented generation, where we just take a query, augment it with a bunch of relevant info, pass all that to the large language model, and that's what drives a very accurate and specific response. So that's how we built Thor AI.
Thank you. It's a good explanation. So we're on our roadmap journey, and we understand that now we can let people play with the law. So our community have been doing that, but we also want to expand that out and start to use our law to actually bring in community, so bring people into the game, well, actually into the community whilst we're building the game. And we started to look at a concept around an application that could actually push I suppose, the learnings that we had through Thor a bit further forward. And we really wanted to start to explore one of the characters that's in our law, so Molly. We wanted to create a game around it, and we created a lost phone game. So a lost phone game is a mobile app that simulates your phone. And by exploring the app itself, you kind of unlock various components of it, so image libraries, chat, and by using sort of like detective skills, you kind of start to pull those things together. One of the things we really wanted to bring to life was being able to contact and speak to some of the contacts in Molly's phone. So to sort of like use natural language models to talk to the characters within Resurgence, and using voice cloning technology, get real-time responses back. So I've got an example of that working here, where Hal Hardy, who's the sheriff of the city where Molly has gone missing, is one of the contacts.
Hello, is this Officer Hal Hardy?
It's very quiet.
Who else would it be?
Oh,
Right, okay. I was just wondering if you have any more information for me about Molly's disappearance. Because I still have a feeling that
yeah, our
you have
volume's
something to do
fully
with
up
it.
on this, I
I
think.
told you I'm not going to share any new information, and I'm not going to entertain your outrageous accusations. I suspect Jamie Lee Beck is behind this. You should be exploring that lead instead of trying to do my job for me. Again.
We could naturally ask questions of Hal Hardy, and we could ask him, and he replied in quite a grumpy way, which was a little bit quiet. I'm sorry about that. We could just naturally ask him questions, and we can carry on our investigation, and we can do that with any of the characters that we find within the story of Resurgence. So I'm going to hand over to Carl, who's going to go a little bit into how we got the natural language model to work.
Sure. Cool. So overall high-level architecture for this one looks very similar to what we were just using for Thor AI. The key differences here is rather than the lore of the world of Resurgence, we've actually got the suspect backgrounds as the main sort of data store that the large language model is querying in this case. So that all of those suspect backgrounds get, again, vectorized, loaded into a vectorized vector database. But what we've got in addition to that is a number of voice clones. So in the case of the example that was just played on the over the audio just now, there was a sheriff talking, and we've got essentially a voice clone, which is we take a number of voice samples of a person talking, we can clone that voice, and then we can generate new sentences and new entire sets of new dialogue in that person's voice without having to actually have them directly speak it. So we take those voice clones, they get loaded into a text-to-speech model. In this case, it's an AWS service called Polly. But those voice clones are fed into Polly, and then what happens is, in much the same way as the players interacted via text using the web app for Thor AI, they either interact via text or using voice on the mobile app. That query gets, again, vectorized, passed to the vector store, checked against all the suspect backgrounds. passed on to the large language model, and the large language model then either spits out a textual output, if we are interacting in a sort of simulated SMS type environment, or it passes that output to a text-to-speech model. The text-to-speech model generates all of the audio that you hear. It can deal with tone of voice, certain emotions, and all of that gets passed to the text-to-speech model. That then passes back into the mobile phone app, and it plays audio back at you in the voice and personality of the character that you're interacting with. So, yeah, that's what we did for the missing app.
Thanks.
Oh, there you go. The additional concepts being the text-to-speech and the speech-to-text and voice cloning.
Cool. Thanks. So, going back to the roadmap, we'd kind of explored using Gen AI to tell story and allow people to sort of like intuitively investigate the website. We started to introduce natural language as a way to sort of like input and interact in the world. And then as we moved towards sort of like getting into more game prototyping, we really wanted to think about how in our world our character, which is a drone, can really help redefine inclusivity and give people a greater way to sort of like engage with the world itself. And depending on your player type or who you are, it kind of adjusts to facilitate that. So for the prototype, we wanted something that was beyond just a robot. So we wanted an assistant within that world that was really a natural extension to the player. So using natural language is a great way for people to interact. It kind of moves away from the traditional input devices and gives you another input device. It's a very reactive and natural way to kind of engage with the world itself. We wanted a way to kind of explore the world around you, and we've already seen how resurgence law is embedded within the AI itself, so we can now utilize that to kind of explore. We wanted it to be a real character, kind of have a real personality that you would really engage with. So, you know, something that would chat to you as you were playing the game, would be aware of your interests as well. But also something that you could really adapt to fit, you know, be it your cultural background or beliefs, or maybe even sort of like reach new audiences that aren't really representative. So, you know, to be able to use the generative AI to do that. So one of the things that we were very keen to explore was the natural language model, and just how you could use that to kind of engage with the world itself.
I'm hungry. Do you think there's anything to eat around here?
I'll scan again for food. Survivor.
And there we go, there's the food right there.
So just by asking the drone to search for food, or it could be discovering resources, it can highlight it to me,
This fruit is native
and I
to
can address it in any way.
environments. Samples indicate that the fruit is ripe and not poisonous.
It can also tell me a bit about, you know, what that food is. So as well as interacting with the drone, and as I said, we really wanted it to be a real character with a real personality. We really wanted it to be able to be adaptive as well in the personas that you gave it. So you could give the drone any type of persona. You could personalize the language that it used. You could, of course, customize it, change its textures, but I guess most importantly was that you were able to kind of adjust the drone to feel particularly personal. So I've got a video that highlights that will probably need a bit of volume.
Hi, I am your drone, here to assist you in your day of resurgence. You can chat to me by using voice activation or pressing tap. You can also change my personality and appearance by asking to customize.
Hey, drone, can you sound like William Shakespeare?
Forsooth, good sir or madam, I shall endeavour to speak in the manner of Master William Shakespeare, that most excellent wordsmith and playwright. Pray, tell me if thou art finished with mine customization.
Can you speak French?
Mais oui, bien sûr 00 FBR. Je peux parler Frano 00 E7T avec un bel accent Frano 00 E7T. Faites-moi savoir quand vous avez fini de me personnaliser.
Hey drone, take on the persona of a London gangster.
Righto, Governor. I'll be your dodgy bloke from the East End, apples and pears. We having a knees up or are we done air?
Give yourself a London accent.
Righto, Governor. I've got myself a proper London accent now, apples and pears. Let me know if you want me to change anything else, or if you're done customizing me.
Give yourself a tartan skin.
Righto. I've updated me skin to have a bright tartan pattern. Let me know if you want me to change anything else, or if you're done customizing me.
So we're looking at ways that people can adapt the skins so that they're not just stretch textures over and have some real fun with it and real personalisation. But it's still very, we're still very much in the prototype phase. But we have some fun with it for sure. Great thing about Gen AI is it tends to produce its best results when you're not recording it. So I'm going to hand over to Carl to talk about how we implemented.
Cool, thanks. So yeah, in this case, I'm not going to talk through all the specific underlying tech that we used. I think what we're going to talk about on this slide is just the fact that we're using, again, a number of large language models to achieve what you just saw in the demo there. In this case, we have one main large language model, which is referred to as a sort of general classifier. That's a model that's been created specifically to understand the types of things you might ask the drone to do. And that might be something like an in-game action, like go and scan for food, or it might be a request to change the drone's personality or its accent, or it might be a request to change the drone's appearance. And in each of those cases, we need to first determine what's being asked. Do I just want a response back as a conversational response from the drone, or do I want to go and invoke some other action under the hood? So the first thing that happens is the request goes to a general classifier. It determines if it's being asked to make some sort of personalization request. If it is, it goes off to the customization classifier, which is just another large language model that has been trained specifically to understand the sort of customizations that are possible. In the case of customization, it's going to be one of three things that we're asking it to do. As I say, either appearance, personality, or voice customization. In each of those cases, it goes off to yet another model. If we're asking it to behave with a different personality, there is a custom personality model that essentially does prompt generation. So if you say, for example, I want you to act like a London gangster, it's going to go off to a large language model and say, generate me a prompt that is going to essentially make me sound like a London gangster. And then every time you're talking and interacting with the drone in the future, that prompt gets, essentially, it augments your query. So the query might be, hey, go and scan for food. But the prompt generation LLM is always going to sort of append that with and make sure you talk in this particular manner, be it a London gangster or a William Shakespeare or a French person. And then it will always include that in the request. Equally, if it's a request for an image or for the skin customization, it will go off to a Gen AI model that generates images. In this case, you're using Titan, which is a model available on AWS. But it then generates that image, and then it applies it to the actual 3D model itself. And then finally, if it's a request for it to talk or act with a certain different sort of voice, we go off to the text-to-speech model. It does some clever stuff under the hood, like if you were to ask it, for example, to act like a young child, it might pitch shift it up. Otherwise, it just picks the most appropriate model, and then that is then baked into how the drone responds to future requests. The other thing the general classifier might do is you might just be talking to the drone. You might just be asking it, tell me a bit of information about the location that I'm in. In that case, the general classifier is a big enough model that it can essentially just respond to you. So it's going to generate that response. It's going to give you, it's going to generate that textual response, and then the drone is just going to essentially give you the response just in text or in voice in this case. back to you. And then the last thing you might be asking it to do is take an in-game action. So rather than using a keyboard shortcut, as you saw in the earlier video, you might say, go and find me some food or scan that item over there. In that case, the general classifier is going to go, okay, I'm being asked about an in-game action, go off to the scan classifier, which knows all the possible in-game actions that you might ask it. And again, in that case, it then instructs the drone what to do. So really the key on this slide is we are using multiple different large language models, all that are trained in certain different specific areas, all joined together by a sort of general classifier that's trained to understand which of the other models it should pass the request off onto. So back to you, Russ.
Thanks. So I guess that's sort of like where we've got to on our roadmap of sort of over the recent months of discovery, and we think that there's a huge opportunity to double down and explore this more because we believe that it gives greater accessibility and more personalization within the games themselves. And we're obviously thinking about, because we have a studio with other game titles in, we're also thinking about how do these things carry over. So with Cerberus, which is our racing game, our Formula One for the skies, we're thinking about how that might work as something like having a commentator or maybe helping you in assessing your performance within a race, or what type of adaptations you might need to make to a vehicle because of different conditions that are occurring, and just real-time coaching. So all the time we're thinking about how this can actually help support us and give greater accessibility to all of our titles. And I suppose that's been part of our journey, is that we've stepped through the different phases of sort of like Gen AI and kind of like dived a little bit deeper each time to get a better understanding, and obviously working with Carl and the team here. So yeah.
Cool, I'll finish up.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. I think that's the areas we wanted to talk about today. There's a big giant QR code on the screen. If you scan that, it'll take you to a web page that has the Thor AI model on it. You can interact with that and ask it a bit about the background of the world. We sadly are running very tight on time, so we don't have time for Q&A in the room, but Russ and I will be down on floor 2 at the AWS for Games stand, just downstairs. We'll be there for the next half hour, 45 minutes or so. So if anybody wants to follow up and ask any sort of deeper dive questions, just come and see us down there. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you.